Good afternoon, sir.
Yo, yo. Welcome to the Beef and Bitcoin podcast. This is episode 59 with your host, Brett and CH. Today's topics, saw some news out of Germany. Looks like negative rates are hitting a larger portion of people who have deposits at banks, at this one bank in particular. And then there was also new German legislation that German banks can now start offering Bitcoin and cryptocurrency related products. So I think that's interesting that both of those are going on at the same time. Second one, there was an interesting article, I believe it was from Bloomberg, that was titled "Hooked on Debt, the Way Out for a World Economy Hooked on Debt, More Debt." So pretty crazy headline tag for them, and we talk about debt all the time, so we'll touch on that. And then lastly, France is testing a digital currency within that first half of 2020. So kind of interesting to see all three of these topics kind of weave in between each other. But how you doing, man?
I'm doing good. This is, again, we're getting more crazy talk when it comes to replacing the current fragile, as I say in quotation marks, as they say in the article, fiat system. It is clear that the people near the top now they see that the structure is failing, and they are looking to hop from one track to the other, hopefully seamlessly, while the general population doesn't ask any questions.
Agree 100%.
It's the only chance they have. They know this whatever this plane they're on, or you could say rocket they're riding, is going to crash, and they have to get off it before it does. And crypto, or I guess I'm not even going to say crypto, a digital currency looks like a pretty nice way out. And obviously you see this kind of implemented in China. We'll see how it fares in the rest of the world.
Yeah. No, it is unbelievable. All right, I guess let's jump into these topics here. So looks like a new bill in Germany, like I had mentioned earlier, it would allow for customers to invest in Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies via Germany-based funds. So in other words, if you have an account at whatever bank in Germany, you might be able to quickly access a Bitcoin fund, similar to the way, I guess, I don't know, how would you put that? Like being able to get into a money market fund or a CD or something like that. You could choose to allocate or buy. I'm assuming it'll be a basket or something like that. And it looks like, this might be a good way to keep some of that money in the country. Right? So if you have a combination of negative yields, so in other words, you're paying to store your money at the bank, and now they're offering these other options of places where you can put your money, it keeps those dollars, euros, or whatever in the country, rather than ending up on Binance or worse for sovereigns into Bitcoin, and then taking those private keys and holding the Bitcoin. So they're losing that. And it just seems to me like this bank VRF in Northern Bavaria is charging 0.5% to hold your money. I don't think that has to happen for too long before people start looking for alternatives. And I just find it interesting that all of a sudden now they can sell in custody cryptocurrencies. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on this?
Free money. I mean, it's ridiculous at this point that, like, if your money, if you leave it in a bank in certain countries or certain regions, if you put, let's say, $100 in there, it's going to be $99 next year or whatever. Depending on the rate you're getting, it's insane. And then you think about that in bigger proportions. They're talking about, like, large corporations are just going to start holding physical cash. They're not going to. Why would you lose thousands and thousands of dollars, if not more, a year? Probably millions of dollars when you think about large companies to negative interest rates. It makes no sense. You're already losing to inflation. Why would you lose even more? So
Right. I think that's a good point that you bring up, is that you got to think about that 0.5% fee and then inflation on top of that. And we know inflation numbers are always wrong,
Understated.
right? They're not
always
accurate at all.
understated.
They're understated by I'd say potentially double, if not triple, in certain years when prices go up, or it takes a few years for prices to readjust, and then they readjust really hard. So you're really, if you're, let's assume 2% inflation, which it's not, you're losing 2.5%, and it's enough to. And I think I don't know that we've covered this, but I thought I saw something like safety deposit boxes are going out of stock quickly because everybody is using them and just throwing their cash in there. Why wouldn't you just throw your cash in there, literally physical cash in there, than leave it in a checking or savings account where it's going to lose money? It's just maybe because I'm just too deep into Bitcoin in this, I'm like, you can't be making this any more bullish for me personally. Like if my bank started doing that here in the United States, I'd be like, okay, well, I'm going to either move it into a different asset, or I can just hold Bitcoin and I can kind of custody that myself. And I'm not going to take that warehousing fee plus inflation. Like it seems like they're trying to use whatever tactics are left kind of in the monetary and fiscal policy tool belt, right? I didn't think we would ever see negative rates, and now we saw them, and now they're really starting to impact not just large accounts. I think it used to be over $100,000, and now it's like pretty much any account, and you're going to get that hit.
Yeah,
I don't know.
It's unfortunate reality of the new normal, as they'd say, we live in. I don't think it can continue, and we see it leaking into other things, as we were talking about. I don't know if we said it already, but we mentioned it definitely before the podcast started, that the $120,000 banana that just sold in an art gallery, a banana duct taped to a wall, sold for $120,000. You can't argue there is just money just flowing into everywhere for no reason. I mean, it makes zero sense. A perishable item duct taped to a wall. It's not art.
Right. Yeah, it's not. I did see that, and it makes me think of like when Safedine, author of the Bitcoin Standard, talks about fiat money and its implications on culture, and how fiat money gives you fiat art. Someone duct taped a banana to a wall and it sold for $120,000, and then apparently some guy ate it. I don't know if you saw that. Like, the guy was like, "Well, I'll see you guys in jail," and he just ate the banana. Whether that was a publicity stunt or not, I think it shows a couple things. One, that's not art, and he kind of proved it just by eating it, and like the $120,000 just completely evaporated. It blows my mind on one hand that somebody paid that much for it, but on the other hand, I think a few decades worth of manipulated interest rates and Federal Reserve policy just produces the most insane amounts of malinvestment that we've ever seen.
No, that's why we see society getting so distorted.
Things like that, to me, it just seems obvious and logical now that when you fuck with the money, you get some really weird stuff that happens, whether it be cultural, behavioral, because everybody's doing these things for a reason. And someone bought the banana art for $120,000, thinking that that was worth more than the $120,000. That's why they did the trade, right? They voluntarily did that. You have to have a pretty fucked up view of what money's worth to spend $120,000 on a banana duct tape to the wall. But I see people spend a lot of money on stupid shit. And now, like, since I'm super frugal and I'm always thinking about Bitcoin and saving for the future for my kids, family, whatever, I even question, it's an easy example. People question like getting guac on a Chipotle burrito. I'm like, man, you could, that might be however many thousand sats. You know what I mean? Like, you have to take it to that level, and I've taken it to that level, and now I look at everything and I'm just like, I can't believe you spent money on that. I can't believe you did that. I can't believe you did that. But I've went from literally one end of the spectrum all the way to the other side. But I don't know. Fiat money does this, and it to me it's super obvious, and I don't think there's any other logical explanation for why we
This
see
chart,
what we
this
see,
chart says it
especially
all.
when it comes to amount investment.
This S&P
Yeah.
chart says it all. It's a rocket ship. Doesn't matter. There's that tweet I saw that was like talking about like traders being short like in like 2013, 2014 of the S&P, and it was talking about just like them getting yanked up, and it's like we are so much higher now. It's absolutely insane. And I don't know where this ends. I have no clue, but I do know whatever comes after is not going to be good. You know, it won't be a permanent plateau.
Right.
No matter how hard they try.
Nothing's ever. And yeah, I think I kind of got suckered into that in 2017 with Bitcoin. You think like as everyone's FOMOing and rushing in, you get that sense of like it's never going to go below this price again,
Never,
and that's
ever.
the reason why you kind of jump in. And right, and now I've like learned from that mistake and think harder about it. And when I look at traditional markets now, I guess in the long term, you can say and state evidence like, you know, in the long term, over a long enough time horizon, it goes up, and you know, sure, but there's always people on the other side of that trade. And you know, I was just talking with a buddy of mine who said one of his buddies had gotten absolutely wrecked in 2007, 2008, buying a bunch of real estate properties to manage with their friends. And, you know, 2008 happened. They lost all their renters, and they lost their shirts. Like they lost everything and foreclosed on like a couple properties. And like that is your typical retail investor that is unsophisticated and thought that they were sophisticated enough to jump into the real estate market and try to make money. A lot of people bought then, and a lot of people will buy the tops of every bubble. The equity bubble this time around is interesting because I don't see the demand, like retail demand for equities. It's really just, I know we've talked about this before, it seems just all very passive. It's just however
very
many
passive.
people are in the workforce that are just contributing to their 401k and like that's buying it.
Yeah, that's buying
and
it.
nobody's actually going out and buying stocks.
Exactly.
From what I can tell.
Stock buybacks are a big portion. Like companies like Apple are going to own itself in a few years just because of the fact that they just keep buying shares back. And it's like, and then you look at things like the Swiss National Bank printing money that can come buy U.S. equities. Okay, so they're creating money out of nothing, you're telling me. And then they're coming over and buying U.S. equities. Okay, sure. The Apple chart here is retarded. It is, and that's the only word that can come to mind. And it's like,
I can't believe, what are those quarterly bars?
no, that's yearly bars. 1 year is each bar.
Oh, those are yearly?
Yeah.
Wow.
Just it's absolutely mind-boggling. And you know one day inevitably it's going to come back to earth.
Yeah.
It's going to make the round trip. I don't know when, but it will, and it will be painful.
Yeah.
Like we see this. People thought that like we think about like GE and Ford are perfect examples. People thought probably at one point these companies will never ever, go bad, and now they're way below their former peaks. Ford is one of the worst. It's a sad, very sad story. It's just never ever even close to what it once was.
Yeah. No, it kind of blows my mind, because this, I guess I was still in college during the financial crisis, and I kind of saw the havoc that kind of wrecked on everybody. But since I wasn't having to survive on my own, like it didn't make sense to me then. But I'm sure if I would have been a couple years older, it would have. I'd be real. Probably even more like. Yeah, it would have just like I'd probably be a fucking bigger asshole than I am already. Like I'd be so just like hating on everything.
You'd be like Brad Pitt in the Big Short. I mean, that's how you'd become. I can't think of his name in the movie, but
yeah, pretty much. I can't. I've been meaning to like watch that again. But I think when we look at this stuff and talk about it, it's actually a really good segue into the next topic about being hooked on debt. The solution to this problem from your mainstream economist or news source is more debt, right?
more
And
crack.
it's and people make this kind of analogy all the time. It's like the heroin addict, like to get them off of heroin, you should give them more to help them fix their addiction. And that's what you see with the central banking system. Globally, each one kind of solves their own problem by adding more debt. So they have a large debt issue. It comes to the point where that they can no longer cover the debt service charge. So they lower rates even more so that they have time to pay the debt service charge and then issue more debt on top of that. And it's hard because in air quotes, it worked in 2008. We printed our way out of it. Now we've printed way more than even back then, because there's so much more money sloshing around the system, and not really too much has happened. And it's hard because on a global scale, things do not look so great, especially in China with their zombie companies. Argentina is not doing so well. They've been suffering from inflation. You have one country, Venezuela, that has completely hyperinflated. The money no longer works there. Turkey's having inflationary issues. And it looks like the EU is starting to see some recessionary signals. And then on the other hand, you have relatively strong numbers out of the United States with unemployment at lows. I guess everything else doesn't look as bad, even though you can tell and intuitively know that the economy is slowing. I don't know. It just
I think
it all
we're in
makes
this
sense
new
why they're
normal.
going to try to use this and issue more debt.
Well,
You know?
the unemployment
Yeah.
thing's also jacked up because it like discludes someone like from the unemployment cloud. What if they don't look for work for like a week, maybe 2 weeks? They're no longer, college students don't count. There's a bunch of different things, and it's all about how they make the calculations. The same thing as CPI. The real CPI is much higher. It's like it's probably close to double digits. It's probably like 9 to 10%, if not more. We both mentioned that like our haircut prices increased in the past year. It's happening, and no one wants to admit it. It's the same thing with groceries. You look at most groceries, like it's shrinkflation. You look in these boxer packages. There's not that many chips. There's not that much of this, that. It's happening everywhere. But the German DAX is a perfect example. And sorry to cut you off there, but like the DAX is almost at all-time highs, yet Germany's entering a recession. Why is that? Because there's liquidity. There's money being added in. I'm going to try to find an old chart because the German DAX, even during like World War II, it's hilarious, did not collapse. It didn't collapse till like the end.
Yeah, I mean they had to print a lot to keep that mess going. The one other thing on this topic that they had mentioned in this Bloomberg article, that a decade after the financial crisis, and global government, corporate, and household debt is at $250 trillion. And a comment from the chief economic advisor for Allianz had said the best way is to grow out of it gradually and consistently, and it is the solution to many but not all episodes of current indebtedness. He sounds a little bit like a paid shill to me. That's just my opinion. If this were like a doctor like giving the same advice, like, oh, just do more of what you're doing that caused the problem, I don't know. It just doesn't make sense. And I almost can't believe that other people believe it.
Yeah, it's this DAX chart is something else, because it's, as you can see, we reached the permanent plateau stage over here. It shuts down during Hitler's come to power, rises, then 38 and 39 when Hitler starts kind of pushing the boundaries, invading Czechoslovakia, Austria. There's a little worry, but no worries. The Blitzkrieg euphoria, the market rallies even higher, all the way through the Battle of Britain into Barbarossa, which is where in 1941 when Germany invaded Russia, and then it kind of petered out here and plateaued for many years until the market was closed in August 1944 as prices were frozen after Stalingrad because Germany was getting bombed around the clock. And this is something interesting I found out recently. I didn't know this, and it's a little off topic, but historically, the output for the war in Germany did not reach the peak until like July of 1944. They kind of just waltzed into World War II, not expecting it to go the way it did, and before you knew it, they were just obviously before they invaded Russia, they were doing so well. It was just unseeming that they would affect their daily lives in Germany. And then things started to turn, and they kept lying about it until it became too obvious. Obviously, when they're getting bombed and people aren't coming home. But it's crazy that they didn't really hit peak production until the very end of the war, which things could be vastly different had that changed around early on.
Well, yeah, I mean, that just has a lot to do with the market. So they weren't getting proper price signals. So you can see how long it took for them to kind of, they were off by however many years or months with having peak production, right? And that has its implications when you've made economic calculation more difficult because you've printed too much money or manipulated interest rates. You run into these issues that the free market helps solve all on its own with people voluntarily working together.
Yeah,
it's mind blowing how I know this is one of your favorite topics, but just how long some of these wars can last when the money doesn't matter. And I guess World War II is a good example. More about World War One
is a perfect example. Like, before that, wars never of that scale had ever happened before. And you look at every country, de-linked from gold, and countries like Germany just started printing versus the United Kingdom, Britain started, levying more of an income tax, etc. And the U.S. was only, like, when we were sending supplies, weapons, etc., food, you name it, materials, we only accepted gold because smart people were like, their currencies aren't right, We didn't know exactly how far they were falling off, but we knew that it wasn't the right price, and so they only accepted gold. That way they could get an idea of what they're happening. And that's when it was before the Bretton Woods system in 1944 that was implemented, but that's when the U.S. slowly started to really take power, was during that period, because what was the British Empire was just collapsing under its own weight.
What you said there really resonated with me, that was it the British who attempted to fund the war via additional income tax?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is an excellent point to kind of point out. That was to their detriment, I'm assuming, because a war needs to be popular enough if it's being funded by direct taxation, meaning I'm physically handing money over to the taxing authority. They need to really stand behind whatever those tax dollars are going through. And in this case, it's war, which is terrible. And I'm assuming the majority of people, even no matter how radical they might be, aren't willing to give up their own money for war, right? Now, on the other hand, you can see where other countries took a different approach and delinked from gold and direct taxation in order to fund wars. And this is a symptom of fiat money, and it's a hidden tax, right? Because it's still technically a tax, and I want to make sure we're very clear about that. Inflation is a tax that you don't realize that you're paying, and it's not a direct tax.
You don't see it.
So in other words, if you have, you don't see it, and you only see it in prices in future years to come. But it's really important to make sure that you look at that as a tax, because if you think about the money that you hold as a certain percentage of the pie, and this is why I think Bitcoin's fixed supply is very interesting, because the percentage that you have of the total supply. And if you could do that with, you can do that with dollar. With gold, we can have estimates of how much there are, but a little bit more difficult to really determine how much outstanding there really is. But with fiat, it's a joke, right? If you have $100,000 worth of fiat, or even $1 million worth of fiat of the total supply, that changes on a daily basis. Like, you'll never know how much of the total supply that you've had. So, I think the war part of fiat money just isn't really discussed enough, and I think everyone can kind of learn something from that, regardless of what you think about wars and military spending, regardless of where you live in the planet. Like, these types of things wouldn't happen unless fiat money was there to, like, let it happen. In other words, on a gold standard, you just wouldn't see this happen, because no one's going to spend hard-earned gold on war. Yeah, it's just not going to happen.
The risk rewards there. So say you're going to go capture, that country's gold and resources or whatever, then that's
and that's
why
what Hitler
war
did. Exactly.
Yeah. No, you think about in that 2-year span, they became basically the continent of Europe. It was like, holy shit. Like, we don't think about that nowadays, but like they became, the vast majority of Western Europe, and their treaty with Russia, they invaded half of Poland, and Russia took the other half. So it's interesting to see that, because I didn't know much about that until Russia and Germany kind of were protecting each other during the interwar period, because Russia was treated as a lesser power because of the revolution, because they became less of the old Russian Empire, and now we're this communist. And I think they finally in the early 30s finally got an ambassador to the U.S. It took a while. Russia was just this rogue state. The USSR was this rogue communist state, and a perfect example is Holodomor, which is where the estimates range a lot from like 3 million to 12 million people were just wiped off the face of the earth through starvation and basically murder and genocide in the Ukraine. And it's not talked about, and it just it's a pretty interesting, and it's such a short time frame too. Also they could basically Stalin and the USSR could take over the crops.
Right. I mean, this is one of the failures that we've
Free
seen
money.
throughout history. Yeah, and then like I'm just kind of learning about as well, just of the different experiments, social experiments with communism and socialism that inevitably fail each and every time. And Mises did a really good job of explaining this. I don't know, like 100 years ago. Just about the issue with it is that you can't perform economic calculation. And that's why most people starve in these situations where people try to implement these social experiments over long enough period of time. When you centrally plan an economy, you can't perform economic calculation, which means you don't have a price function, which means you end up having shortages and people starve to death. And it is as simple as that. And I highly recommend, I think both Mises and Rothbard wrote books on socialism and just the economic calculation issue. So I definitely recommend reading that. But I also think it's a good. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna go. You finish your topic there. I was gonna come and chime in after that.
Yeah, no, I think I was never interested in political points of view prior to Bitcoin, and I think it's fascinating that understanding why socialism doesn't work really just comes down to human action and understanding economics, and just that function that the free market plays of being able to understand the prices of goods and services. So you end up using the subjective value theory rather than cost-based pricing, and you understand that the market is only willing to pay for what it's willing to pay for because of what it values something for. Yeah. And when you don't have the free market to help determine prices, you cannot centrally plan economies in such a way. And I was literally just watching a YouTube video with Rothbard giving a talk in like 1971 or something, and somebody asked him that question about socialism and economic calculation, and he's like, from the socialists that he had debated, he was like, okay, well, and let's say like
how do you know what you need for
a socialist country, and scanned it, how do you know? And he's like, well, we use the global prices to determine what the price that we should lead with, and then they adjust from there. And then Rothbard goes, so what would you do if you didn't have a price already to go off of? And like that was the end of the conversation. So like you just can't perform that price function from one central location. It's just impossible. You need competitors and the free market providing services at whatever the consumer is willing to pay for, and then going from there. So the perfect example will be, hopefully in another couple of years, everyone will have learned that the business model of WeWork doesn't work. And the free market provided that service to us for free and let us know that that's not a good business model right now. But when it continues to get funded by venture capital or overseas money, or people just throwing stupid sums of money at it like SoftBank, these things can last so much longer. And the free market's not, by not letting these businesses fail, you don't. Say. Right. Exactly, and I think that's the way to really kind of close the loop is that it all stems from fiat money, and the manipulation of interest rates is in no way, shape, or form a free market activity. So that's why you have these big distortions.
Yeah, because I'm willing to bet if the market had to choose, people wouldn't be getting negative returns or zero back on their money in real terms. I'm sure they would like a little bit, especially considering how risky things are in our current system, even though it doesn't seem that way.
Yeah, it's rocky for sure. And I guess that's a good segue into, we have this rocky foundation right now. We just talked about the debt. We talked about zombie companies in China. We talked about Argentina looks like shit. There's hyperinflation everywhere. More economic data is coming out that isn't so great. How do you solve the $250 trillion debt question? And, I guess I've been speculating for the last couple of months now. Well, how do you default and switch to something else? And now it looks like France is testing a digital currency come 2020. And then our good friends over at Deutsche Bank put out a recent article saying that crypto could replace cash by 2030 as fiat system looks fragile. Tell me what you think about that.
As I said earlier, it's just they're trying to hop from one track to the other seamlessly, hoping that no one asks questions. I mean, that's what I imagine right now with a lot of countries and central banks is they're like, okay, how can we get off this fiat system without really getting off it, but presenting this new basically illusion, which is fiat money. It's just a belief system, and the second that belief crumbles, there's nothing of value to it, as we see with a lot of countries that experience hyperinflation. Or when we see just, if you watch markets at all, you can watch it happen like with the British pound where it's been getting crushed throughout this whole Brexit thing, and it's spiked back up a few times, but where it just has been getting crushed since that they had the new prime minister put in Boris Johnson, if I remember correctly, and it was getting, and it doesn't seem like much, but it's losing, 5, 6, 7% over a time period. That's a good amount of, when you think about people holding large amounts of this currency for international business, that's losing a lot of money.
The whole thing's a complete shit show, and some of the other comments from that Bloomberg or from the Deutsche Bank kind of report was that the current fiat system looks fragile, particularly because of decades of low labor costs and inflation. And crypto, however, and this is the part that really gets me, crypto, however, needs to become legal in the eyes of governments and regulators to become widespread. Over the next decade, things could change and demand for alternative currencies from gold to crypto could take off. So a couple points on that. One, I think over the next decade, that absolutely there will be humongous demand for alternative currencies because people are starting to wise up that, like, I've never heard so much talk about inflation and fiat money ever in my entire life.
No, it's
like now
it's
all of a sudden
fiat.
You hear fiat money like on CNBC now. So and that's a term that literally only gold bugs were using. And now you have, Bitcoin and crypto people who are talking fiat and this and fiat that and all this stuff.
It's leaking into everything else like FinTwit. It's leaking everywhere. Everyone's
exactly.
now asking, all the traders, all these traders, you see all these trading people, pseudo memes, they're all asking questions. Oh, we're not monetizing the debt, stuff like that. One would call this monetizing the debt.
Yeah, it's being memed. Like everybody's starting to wake up. The funny part is that the majority, if not all of them, went to probably very prestigious institutions, learned Keynesian economics, and have been fucking drinking the milk from the teat of, the Marxists for decades now. And all of a sudden, when it doesn't look, when the system looks fragile, now they're okay with throwing around fiat money and all these terms. To get back to that one comment about crypto needs to become legal in the eyes of governments and regulators to become widespread, I think there's a lot to unpack with that comment. Because on one hand, I think it's accurate that there is a large percentage of citizens, regardless of what country they're from, that will not engage with alternative currencies without kind of like the government blessing. But then on the other hand, people have been doing illegal shit forever because it's in their best interest to. Not that I think using an alternative currency should be viewed as illegal in any stretch of the imagination. I think, it's important for the free market to produce a free market money, and it was gold for thousands of years and worked pretty well. So I don't see why that's such a bad thing, but I do get concerned about like the swift banning and just kind of seeing how that plays out. I don't think it will last in the long term, but in the short term, I think it could get a little hairy. So I've been trying to think like I might want to do more Bitcoin shilling or figure out other ways to start gifting Bitcoin. And I was listening
Shilling.
to I was listening to this guy who started a new company called Give Bitcoin, and it's really interesting. You can gift Bitcoin to somebody, and it puts it like in a time lock, either a year or 5 years, and then it sends them monthly educational content just about Bitcoin. And so I think, and his point was about the regulatory issue. He's like, we want to get Bitcoin in the hands as of many Americans as humanly possible, so that when the time or day comes that Bitcoin is a multi-trillion-dollar asset and it looks like fiat currencies aren't doing so hot, it will become vastly unpopular to ban such a thing. I think it's a lofty goal. I'll help as best as I can, but it did kind of put some things into perspective to me that it's important that it starts to grow, and it's important that people understand that there are alternatives to the money that they're forced to use. I don't know. What do you think?
It's one of those things again, like you think about this from a perspective is like, you and I grew up under the US dollar standard, under 100% fiat standard. And it's something that's, will it change overnight? Probably not, because you got to remember, there's so many people that have grown up under this and don't put thought into it. Now, I think once you kind of jump down the rabbit hole of what is money, and you realize, the time before the gold standard period, technically up until 1971 for the U.S., you start to be like, okay, you start to ask questions. It can take time, and that's where I'm thinking this will be, is one of those things that it will start to increase as as we've seen on the FinTwit side. There's people just more and more kind of mocking and memeing the whole current central bank situation where they're just printing money. These guys have no clue what they're doing, and we have negative rates like everywhere basically, except for the U.S. where we barely have real rates. And the nominal rates sure can be positive, but it's one giant scheme that's barely hanging on by a thread. And all we've done is kick the can down the road from 2008, 2009, and it's just so much worse now. That's the issue. Any deflation...
Right, here we are a decade later.
Any deflation is going to ruin all of retirement. Literally all of it. When you talk about real estate prices, you talk about bond prices, when you talk about equity prices, it doesn't matter. It's going to just destroy everything. And obviously all the speculative stuff like a $120,000 banana or like, certain collector cars, etc.
I think that's a good point, that any kind of deflation from the traditional financial system would just not be good in general. You have a large majority of the population, at least in the U.S., who's getting ready to retire in the next few years, and that could have tremendous amount of issues as their assets that they were hoping to spend during their retirement go away. Now, on one hand, there's a small percentage of boomers who have the outsized amount of wealth, right? So let's just use like an 80-20 rule here. So let's say 20% of the people who are retiring have 80% of the wealth. Now, if that wealth starts to decrease, while they'll still be okay, their spending habits will change. And that has a ripple effect into the economy where certain small businesses or things that they would have been spending money on had there not been some sort of a recession starts to go away. Some people like to get massages, and then if times are tough, they're going to stop getting massages, right? So there's a certain order of goods that starts not being in demand just because it's not something that you're going to spend money on in hard times. And that's where I think the ripple effect of boomers not having enough to spend on retirement can get a little hairy for the generations below and for themselves.
Exactly. It's gonna come down to how long can they keep this facade up at the end of the day. I don't think much longer. I think that's why we see all this push to, oh, these digital currencies are now very appealing, because 2 years ago it wasn't like this. 2 years ago people were still pretty skeptical, even though it was the
You're
peak
right.
of the bubble. And when you think about 2.5 years ago, it was even more and more skeptical. So it's, this bandwagon for the digital currency or the stable, whatever you want to call it, stable shitcoin, stable coin. It's all a joke. We will see it play out, and I hope we get to record the downfall. If we can record
Yeah,
it.
I know.
If we can
record
because that's the thing, like,
yeah.
it's, I don't know, are we going to be able to record this when when it really hits the fan? I don't know.
No, it's a good point, and I guess if we keep recording long enough, we'll eventually get to talk about it. But I don't know. I'm excited either way, because like you can see it happening. It's like the cracks are starting to happen. Everything's starting to make sense.
Seeing
Like
the light
puzzle's
come through
really
the other
starting to
side.
get put together.
Yeah, and it seems like all these different people from different backgrounds are kind of merging together. Like, something's not right here. And it's different because versus 2007, 2008, 2006, when Twitter was barely a thing, and social media and the connectedness of the world we live in today was so much different. Even though there was the internet, it wasn't the same. Nowhere near the same. Someone pointed that out the other day. It's a very good point. The internet of even 7 or 8 years ago is much different than it is today. Today it feels like this corporate slosh ground where you're funneled into these thought belief patterns, and it's really annoying. You look things up on YouTube, look things in Google. If you can look up certain things and it won't show up, they clearly want it blocked. Like, YouTube's a perfect example. And I don't want to name videos, but I'm not going to name any right now. But it seems like we're, hopefully a liberation of the internet soon too, because that, we've kind of lost it.
I think you really nailed it, and I'm actually more bullish on the generations below millennials, who are just kind of sick of all the millennial bullshit and censorship, and just like, I don't know, I'm a little bit older than you are, but the internet was pretty fucking sweet when I was a kid, and like when YouTube was first happening and people torrenting stuff and gaming online, and I know all that stuff is kind of blown up more since then, but it was really ingrained in the culture, and you could talk shit on the internet and it was like it was just totally normal, because it was like the last free space that humans could kind of go to. And now it's like gotten way worse, and believe me, I'll say that it's a symptom of fiat money as well, all of the political correctness and censorship on the internet, and financial censorship of the internet. But honestly, it just makes me more bullish, because now there are more solutions and more people coming to the same realization. And as you said, there are people from different backgrounds now who are starting to put together their own piece of the huge puzzle that we're trying to put together too. And it's cool to see people from just different backgrounds, exactly as you said, starting to piece everything together, and it is starting to make sense for people with large sums of money who can start to play the game differently.
Yeah, to play your assets effectively.
Yep. What do you think? Is that a good way to wrap this one up?
Yeah, a little bit longer. Good way to kind of end the segment and give our thoughts on the current system that is just pending on, I don't know how much longer it goes on, but I think we will be able to record it, and that's all that matters. So it's a good way to wrap it up.
Yeah, for sure. This has been episode 59. Well, go ahead.
I was gonna say, yeah. Well, you can finish it. I was gonna say episode 59, but you already beat me to the punch.
Yeah, no. This is make sure to like and subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Follow us. Shoot us a DM. Leave us a comment. Tell us what you want us to talk about. Anything that we missed that we can give our take on, we're happy to do it. All right. Thanks for listening.
Peace.
Peace.